Hello again, it's me, Joseph. In case you can hear the music in the background, today we are playing Bruce Coburn's uh, Anything, Anytime, Anywhere, singles 1979-2002, which is very shortly after I discovered him. He was lying under a rock. It was just an amazing thing before he was brought to my attention. And I've just been enthralled by the man's music and his ethics ever since. So don't tell me he's a schmuck. I don't want to know. There. Okay. I've had enough of my heroes collapse under the weight of my adulage. The last time we gathered, I talked about the openings, and I talked about the openings to a novel. What I forgot to include was the fact that what works for a novel works for a story, works for a paragraph, works for a scene. You want to have the same things. You want to keep the reader moving forward. You want to let them know who owns the paragraph, the story, the scene, especially if you have a longer work where you're going to be shifting points of view, you have shifting characters taking over. You always want to let the reader know as soon as possible, best if it's in the first sentence, best if it's immediate, as they start that scene or paragraph, who owns it, who controls it, who's it about, whose point of view will it be in. Likewise, you want to have something as exciting as possible, as interesting, as catching as possible. After that, you can go wild. You can use subordinate clauses. You can use parenthetical clauses. So long as you've given something at the beginning that makes them want to read through whatever it is, paragraph, scene, to find out what was going on in that first sentence, your reader will stay with you. That is one of the secrets you learn if you ever study journalism, if you ever write journalistic pieces. You want to put who, what, when, where, why right up front as soon as possible, so the reader knows what's this going to be about, what is going on here, what's happening, who's involved. Hopefully, if you're doing it well, whether you're a journalist or a fiction writer, nonfiction writer, whatever, you will be able to carry that through, that concept, the idea. You may not do the whole who, what, when, where, why. You may give them 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5, but you have to give them enough if they want to keep on going. Now, I wanted this entry here to be about closings. And we're going to go back to why the new version of Empty Sky is, in my opinion, better than the 2016 version. The 2016 version, we had Jamie at the end, and there was one of the problems. You remember the 2016 version, it started out with the moon. The opening of the book was the moon, and it ended with Jamie, okay? The chapter is entitled Just for Looking Through. And basically, Jamie is on a jet, on a plane somewhere traveling, and something happens. He doesn't know if he's hallucinating or dreaming, but he sees his mother, he sees his dad, he sees Shem. And at the very end, Jamie reaches into his pocket and pulled out the gate. There was no magic left in it, at least so the old one said, but he still held it up to his eye and gazed at himself in the mirror just the same. Good place to end if the story had started with Jamie. It started with the moon. The moon story arc concludes earlier than that. I'm not even sure if it did conclude properly in there. That's something else we'll get to. Here's the 2023 version. And this is also called Just for Looking Through, but now it's chapter 58 instead of 43. What's happening here in this version, in the 2023 version, the most recent version, is he's on the plane, Jamie's on the plane, but now we know for a fact he's older. As a matter of fact, we know for a fact he's a professor somewhere or a doctor or something. And he's being interviewed because there's a reporter. Before it was just Jamie by himself. Now there's a reporter. Jamie raised his coffee cup and stared out the cabin window as the reporter tapped notes into his tablet. The moon lit the plane's wing and the earth below. Stars burned bright in the high altitude night. So you notice that even though this is the final chapter, I have started it, as I said before, with the opening. We know, the reader knows who owns this chapter, who's in control, who's going to do the most change here. The reporter looked up. I understand you worked with him, Lupachin. Is that correct? So now this other character in here, this reporter, is now basically interviewing Jamie. So Jamie, essentially through exposition and narration, gets to tell the reader everything else that didn't get closed in the story. Pretty much everything else is closed, but sometimes the readers need a little bit more help. So yes, I studied with him, I got my doctorate with him, and returned to him now and again as time allowed and need dictated. You were there when he died, weren't you? Yes, at his home in Vermont. He retired with his wife. I won't tell you who that is. That would be a spoiler. And that Native American fellow you mentioned, he was there too. And I'm not going to tell you whether yes or no, but Jamie responds to that. And then, we do have all the main characters are closed. And we do go back to Jamie either dreaming or hallucinating that Shem and his parents are there. Jamie hears from the aisle, "Come on back, Shem. Time to go, boy." A man's voice, his dad's voice, coming from further back in the fog. Shem scooted away. "Hey!" He shook himself awake, stretched, and stood up. Both forward class labs showed occupied. No doubt his staff. He loved hot, spicy foods, and his people did their best to keep pace with them, but their stomachs always argued a few hours after a meal. He walked to the lavatories at the rear of the plane. Passing the reporter, he said, "Hope. Hope cannot exist unless loss walks beside it." She nodded. "Both come from the greatest gifts, the most powerful gifts, love and imagination." She smiled. Jamie entered the lab. He splashed some water in his face and looked at himself again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the gate. There was no magic left in it, at least so the old one said, but he still held it up to his eye and gazed at himself in the mirror just the same. So what happens there is not only are we closing the story, we've got the denouement, the winding down. We're also having something that the late great A.J. Budrys taught me, which was somebody in the story has to say the story is done. For the reader, for the viewer, for whoever, to accept the fact that, okay, this is where the end is. Somebody has to say, and that's what happens here. Jamie says, and he did in the original version too, 2016 version, that he looked in the gate, he knew there was no magic anymore. But it was just for looking through. So we have the closing, which wraps everything up, wraps it up as quickly as possible. To me, this is one of the flaws with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, is essentially the story ends. Sauron is defeated, and it takes another 200, 150, 200 pages to end the books and the story. That was really tedious for me. But the ending must be closed. It must finish the through line that began in the beginning. I'll put a link underneath this video so you'll know where you can look up through lines. But a through line is essentially the elements of the story which are common throughout everything in the story, so the reader has something to link themselves to, so that the viewer has something to acknowledge, okay, that's tied to this, tied to this, tied to this, tied to this, tied to this. That's not necessarily a character, not necessarily a plot point, not necessarily a mood, could be a mood or emotion, but it's some element or elements of the story that provide the reader the clear line from beginning to end that they can follow so easily and cleanly. So there you have it. That's closings. You have to make sure that whoever owned the story at the beginning closes the story at the end. You have to make sure that all the threads are tied up. Don't leave anything loose. Even if you're doing a series. If you're doing a series and you're going to have a sequel, make sure this story is closed. You can point to the next story. You can point to the sequel or the next book in the series. But this story has to be closed, or else the reader will get a little fed up after they've gotten through 3 or 4 of your books. Granted, they bought 3 or 4 of your books, but you have 15 books in the series. They stopped after book 4, 3 or 4, because does this thing ever end? No. They want things to end. They want things to say, aha, okay, good. I'll go get the next book, but I'm glad this one's done. Let me know if I forgot anything. And if I did, I'll put it in the next video. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Got to find the stop recording button now. Here it is. Found it.